So you have on one side of the aisle, you have someone like Dave Ramsey, who, potentially is maybe, arguably one of the biggest personal finance guys out there, at least publicly, right?
Yep.
And Dave Ramsey's mantra is never use debt. Never use debt. Pay off any debt you have. Don't use debt. My friend Robert Kiyosaki, he says that he's on the opposite side of the table, where he's like, hey, I'm $1 billion in debt. Great. Donald Trump was called the king of debt, right, in his career. But Robert Kiyosaki says that Dave Ramsey is right for most people, because most people don't have that sophistication built up to understand this, right? So there's like different ways that I would look at that rate, right? So number one is like, is it worth me borrowing at 10, 12, 14, 15%? Well, it depends. How much am I making with it? So when I was really heavily in building real estate, and I've been involved for a long time in like hard money loans. So I might, be able to get a mortgage loan at that time for 4 or 5%, but I might pay 12% for hard money. But if I'm going to make 50% on the deal, I'll pay the 12%. So it really comes down to like, how much am I going to make from borrowing? So if I'm borrowing at 15%, what am I doing with that money? So a lot of times I think people look at borrowing and it's like, oh, I'll borrow against it and I'll go on a vacation. And maybe you don't want to pay 15% for that. But if I'm going to buy a new truck for my business, that's going to make me much more than 50%. It's probably a pretty good deal.
Definitely. And there's alternatives, like let's say you were borrowing just to spend on a vacation. If what you were going to do instead was sell Bitcoin to pay for that vacation, maybe borrowing actually works out. Even though you're using funds in something that doesn't appreciate at all, you get to benefit from the appreciation of the asset that you otherwise would have lost out on if you sold. So yeah, I think a lot of it is the sophistication of the borrower. There's a lot of education that needs to be done here, just to even show people what they can do. I think when you talk about borrowing against your assets, it's very vague, but if you can make that concrete and say, look, here's an example if you invested in real estate and how the numbers play out, people can start to wrap their heads around that.
Yeah. Obviously, I'm big in the education space, so I am, of course, agreeing with you. I think about in sort of a way to look at this in real estate, as you mentioned. So if I make $1 million, I can pay half of that to taxes, and I have 500,000 left. I could, back in the napkin math, buy $1 million piece of real estate with 200 grand and get $1 million of write-off.
Yep.
And so a lot of people look at the real estate market and go, oh, if it drops 20, 30%, all these people are underwater. It's like, dude, I just saved $1 million in taxes. What do I care if the property drops by 200 grand? I don't care, right? And so again, that's sophistication. And if you think about sort of Bitcoin in the same way, where it's like, I want to borrow, but it's 15%, but I can't make 15% with the money. I'm only going to make 5 or 6%. Okay, well, that's one way to look at it. But if the asset's going up by 50 or 60%, does it offset the difference I'm paying? That'd be one way to look at it, right? A more sophisticated way. The other way you could look at it is, if I, to your point, my other option might be to sell the Bitcoin to get the cash, but now that's a taxable event, so now I have to pay the tax, so now I've lost some there. And then, of course, I no longer have that Bitcoin going up in value. And so it gets a little bit more complex in how I have to calculate that out. Which is why Dave Ramsey's right for most people. They don't understand that. But I guess this is one reason why you see the sophisticated people making the rich getting richer and richer and the poor not.
Yeah, exactly. I think it stems down to really just education. And I think you do a lot of good work, and so do other people, on just helping illustrate this. I've actually had customers of ours email me saying, hey, I saw this video of Mark Moss on retiring against with Bitcoin and how you can strategically borrow. And things like that are needed. People need to see, okay, what can I do? How can I make my current asset base work for me, as opposed to always just defaulting to sell. Now you pay taxes and you're really left with much less than you otherwise would have.
Yeah. So where do you see Bitcoin going? Do you factor that into your business? Because Bitcoin has historically had these 4-year cycles.
Yep.
Until proven otherwise, I think they continue. We can get into that, but more on the macro side, I think this 4-year cycles aren't just because of the Bitcoin halving, which certainly has a piece of it, but it's really the liquidity 4-year cycles that we have. So debt cycles globally are sort of on that same cycle. So it seems like that continues, and that could be very dangerous when you're borrowing. right? So do you take that into consideration as far as like the loan orders, or is that just up to the individual person to sort of like educate themselves on that?
Yeah, I think we try to help as much as possible here. And the main way to do it when you think about volatility of Bitcoin is, one, be very transparent about what happens. And so you will not take out a loan with us without knowing exactly at what price you're getting margin called, at what price there's a liquidation. And we notify you even well before that. We're sending emails, we're calling, and just letting people know like, hey, our goal is to help you keep your Bitcoin. Like we're got into this business to help people get cash and keep their assets. And so we do not want to be liquidating customers without them being aware of it and saying, yes, I'm okay with this.
Right.
And so as a result of that, one, we have a long ways to go to keep putting out more educational content. But second, we also tell customers very clearly, you can decrease your loan to value. You can be more conservative with the loan amount you're taking with respect to your Bitcoin. And then obviously there's all the white glove customer service that we have on our side, just calling up customers, emailing them, letting them know if anything is, unhealthy with their loan state.
I'm curious from a company standpoint and your projections for growth. I would assume a lot of those projections for growth would come to basically down to the projection of where Bitcoin goes to. I've been very outspoken. A talk I gave in Abu Dhabi here recently, I said that I think Bitcoin would be $1 million by 2030, 15 million by 2040. And so obviously if Bitcoin does follow that trajectory, there's going to be a lot of locked up equity, which then would lead to more customers that might want to tap into that locked up equity. I'm curious your views on that and kind of how you think about that with your company's growth.
Yeah. I don't have specific price like targets, but I think roughly in line with what you're saying in terms of I expect Bitcoin to continue going up and to the right. And what that really means is growth in the soaring like borrowing industry. More and more people are going to have equity tied up in this asset. They don't want to sell Bitcoin. And here are ways for them to get cash and continue to own their Bitcoin. Also, when you look at it, I can't remember the exact statistics off the top of my head, but Bitcoin as an asset class has a very lower level of borrowing against it relative to many other assets. Like when you think about like houses, gold, things of that sort.
Right.
And so one, even at current price levels, there is a long way to go. And I think part of it is education. Part of it is just people becoming more familiar with the space. Companies like us evolving from the generation one that blew up and, continuing to sort of exude trust for customers. But then the second is as the market cap of Bitcoin continues to go up, naturally more and more people are going to borrow. And so I think the whole industry grows together there.
Yeah. Okay.
And we see it like as Bitcoin pricing moves up, you see borrowing demand sort of go up as well.
As it should.
Yeah.
Don't sell it.
Yeah, exactly.
Leverage against it. I mean, that's the mantra that I'm trying to get through people's head. Don't give up your Bitcoin, right?